A man walked into the night on March 14, 1997 and never came home. For 30 years his wife believed he was dead. His children grew up without him. His grave was empty but the grief was real. Detectives searched for decades. The police called it unsolved. The family called it heartbreak. Everyone assumed Lucas Anderson was gone. Then, in 2024, DNA from a genealogy database made contact. Lucas Anderson wasn't dead. He was alive. He'd been alive the entire time, living 3 states away under a different name deliberately erased from existence. But here's what changes everything. He wasn't hiding from the law. He was hiding from something far darker. Something that happened on the night he disappeared. Something involving a murder he witnessed. A crime that forced him to choose. Keep your identity or keep your life. And he chose to live. This is the story of a man who disappeared while still breathing. A man whose family grieved him for 3 decades while he walked free, but imprisoned by silence. A man whose case was solved not by detective work, but by modern technology that didn't exist when he vanished. A case that reveals a horrifying gap in the American justice system. A place where witnesses fall through the cracks and disappear not because they're dead, but because the law abandoned them. Today, 30 years later, the truth is finally out. But the truth doesn't bring closure. It brings questions. Darker questions. Harder questions. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, comment below and tell me your country. Tell me where you're watching from. Because this case spans 3 states, involves federal crimes and raises questions about justice that go far beyond one missing person. This is a story that matters globally. And I want to know who's watching. Now, let's go back to March 14, 1997. Let's go back to the night Lucas Anderson vanished. In 1997, Lucas Anderson was invisible. Not in a bad way. He wasn't lonely or forgotten. He was the kind of man who blends into the background of normal life. Reliable. Predictable. The type of person you'd nod at but not remember. This was his superpower, though he didn't know it yet. Lucas was 48 years old. He worked the same job for 22 years at a textile manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. Same shift. Same machine. Same routine. A factory operator. Someone who arrived at 6:30 a.m. without fail and clocked out at 5:47 p.m. His co-workers respected him because he was consistent. Never called in sick. Never complained. Never stood out. At home, Lucas was the quiet husband. He'd been married to Sandra for 25 years. They had a daughter together, Michelle, 19 years old, living at home. Lucas had 2 adult sons from a previous relationship, but they didn't see him often. His world was small. Ordered. Safe. Every Thursday night, Lucas played cards with the same 4 men. He attended church on Sundays, sat in the same pew, spoke to nobody. He fixed his own car, changed the oil himself, kept the house maintained. He wasn't ambitious. He didn't want more. He wanted what he had: stability, predictability, a life that didn't demand anything extraordinary from him. Sandra described him in an archived interview from 1998. Lucas was steady. He was there. He wasn't exciting, but he was there. He came home every night. He never missed dinner. He was mine. His supervisor at the plant remembered him as a ghost in a hard hat. Perfectly invisible. The kind of guy you'd need to look at the roster to remember his name. But invisibility is a vulnerability. Because invisible people don't have alibis. Invisible people don't have witnesses to their movements. Invisible people can disappear and the world takes a long time to notice. On March 14, 1997, Lucas left work at 5:47 p.m. His truck was seen on Route 17 heading toward home at 6:15 p.m. By 7:30 p.m. he was officially missing. By midnight he was a mystery. And nobody, not his family, not the police, not even Lucas himself, understood why. The night of March 14, 1997, began like any other night. 5:47 p.m. Lucas clocks out of the textile plant. His time card is stamped. 2 co-workers see him walking to the parking lot, his gray jacket zipped against the evening chill. Nobody says goodbye. Nobody remembers anything unusual. He gets into his 1992 Ford pickup truck. Beige, worn, unremarkable. The engine starts. He drives toward the exit. 6:15 p.m. A gas station attendant on Route 17 remembers seeing a truck matching Lucas's description pass by heading south. The attendant is certain about the time because he was checking his watch, about to take a break. He doesn't remember the driver. Doesn't see the face. Just the truck. Just the direction. 7:30 p.m. Sandra makes the first phone call. Lucas should be home by now. He's always home by 6:45 p.m. She's not panicked yet, maybe traffic, maybe he stopped for something. But worry creeps in. She calls the plant. No answer, they've closed for the day. She waits. She calls again. 8:45 p.m. Sandra calls the Charleston Police Department. A missing persons report is filed. The officer taking the call notes, no signs of distress in her voice. No indication of violence or emergency. Just a wife concerned about a late husband. Routine. The report is filed. An officer says they'll keep an eye out. No immediate alarm. Midnight. Search begins. Police contact the highway patrol. They check hospitals. No accidents reported on Route 17. No vehicle matching Lucas's description involved in any incident. They contact his family members. Nobody has heard from him. His sons haven't spoken to him in weeks. Sandra is now frantic. She drives the route he takes home looking for his truck. Nothing. 3 a.m. The truck is still missing. The police escalate. They issue a notice to local law enforcement. They contact his workplace supervisor. Had he seemed distressed? Had he mentioned anything unusual? The supervisor says no. Lucas was quiet as always. Finished his shift. Left as he always did. By dawn on March 15, 1997, the Charleston Police Department understands one thing with absolute certainty. Lucas Anderson has vanished. His truck has vanished. And there is no explanation. No accident. No body. No crime scene. No ransom note. No goodbye letter. No evidence of anything except absence. It's as if he drove into thin air. Search parties formed on March 15th. Police dogs were brought to the textile plant, given Lucas's scent from his work clothes. They tracked him to the parking lot. Then nothing. The scent ended at the road. Dogs can follow a trail, they cannot follow a vehicle. The search expanded to the forests around Route 17. Volunteers combed through brush and ravines. Helicopters swept the area looking for the beige pickup truck. Local news stations ran evening broadcasts. Local man missing. Do you know Lucas Anderson? Within 48 hours, the police had interviewed everyone. Co-workers, family, friends, neighbors. The questions were always the same. Was he depressed? Was he having an affair? Was he in debt? Was he in trouble? Sandra answered no to every question. His co-workers said the same. His boss confirmed that Lucas had no disciplinary issues. The plant's records showed no financial problems, no loans being garnished. His family had no knowledge of any crisis. By all available evidence, Lucas Anderson had a reason to live, a reason to stay, a reason to exist in the life he'd built. But he was gone. A hotline was established. Tips flooded in. A man matching Lucas's description was spotted in Georgia. Police chased the lead for a week. It was a false alarm. Another tip, he'd been seen in a diner in North Carolina. Police followed up, the description didn't match. Another, he'd abandoned his truck in Virginia. Investigators drove 8 hours only to find a different vehicle. The tips became white noise. The police couldn't distinguish between genuine leads and the noise of a frightened community offering half-remembered sightings. By April 1st, the search had stalled. No body. No vehicle. No trace. The police were operating in a void with no physical evidence to guide them. Detective Raymond Hayes, a veteran investigator assigned to the case, sat at his desk surrounded by interview notes and found patterns that didn't exist. He was chasing ghosts. Sandra gave a press conference on April 5th. She stood in front of local news cameras, her voice trembling. Lucas, if you're listening, please come home. We don't know what's happened to you, but we want to help. Please. We love you. She cried on camera. The footage ran on every local news station. It went nowhere. By mid-April, the media had moved on. By June, the case was cold. The police file grew thicker, but there were no leads. No theories that held water. No evidence of any kind. Lucas Anderson had simply ceased to exist. In small towns, missing persons become folklore. Within weeks, Charleston's working-class neighborhoods were filled with theories. Whispered conversations in grocery store aisles. Hushed discussions at church. Speculation over coffee. Each theory was plausible enough to seem real, but none could be proven. Theory 1, he crashed. He must have driven off the road, people said. Gone into a ravine. The truck's buried somewhere they haven't looked yet. This theory persisted for years. Every few months, someone would spot what they thought was wreckage and call the police. Every time it was nothing. Theory 2, he abandoned his family. He was probably having an affair, the gossip went. Found another woman. couldn't face his wife so he just ran. This theory was cruel but popular. It painted Lucas as a coward, a man who chose love over duty. Sandra would hear these whispers and feel the shame that comes with public speculation about private pain. Theory 3: He took his own life. Depression, people said. Maybe he was depressed and nobody noticed. This theory haunted the family because it suggested they should have seen something, should have known something. The guilt became as real as the grief. Theory 4: Foul play. This was the darkest whisper, the one that nobody said out loud but everyone suspected. What if something happened to him? What if someone hurt him? What if there's a body somewhere? This theory kept the case alive in people's minds, kept it from becoming just another solved mystery. But there was one other theory whispered by only a few people. A theory based on nothing but intuition and the kind of pattern recognition that comes from watching too many detective shows. What if he saw something he shouldn't have? This theory had no evidence. No police suspected it. No investigation followed from it. But it was the closest to the truth, spoken by people who didn't know what they were saying, who were guessing in the dark. Michelle, Lucas's 19-year-old daughter, heard all these theories. She heard people at school discuss her father's disappearance like it was entertainment. She heard the whispers about affairs and suicide and murder. She learned that a missing parent doesn't just disappear. They become a public property, a mystery that belongs to everyone. By 2000, the Lucas Anderson disappearance had become part of Charleston's identity. Not solved. Not forgotten. Just there. Raymond Hayes was 42 years old when he was assigned to the Lucas Anderson case. He'd been with the Charleston Police Department for 18 years. He had good instincts, decent clearance rates, and a reputation as a solid investigator. But he had one character flaw that would define the rest of his career. He couldn't accept unsolved mysteries. For most detectives, an unsolved disappearance from 1997 would be filed away, referenced occasionally, pulled out when new DNA technology became available, then filed away again. Hayes wasn't most detectives. In the first 3 months after Lucas disappeared, Hayes worked the case obsessively. He interviewed everyone twice. He drove Route 17 at different times of day, trying to recreate Lucas's last drive. He theorized about what could have happened in those 43 minutes between 6:15 p.m. and 7:30 p.m., the gap where Lucas vanished. He drew maps. He made timelines. He sat in his car outside Lucas's house at 5:47 p.m., trying to understand the moment of departure. His colleagues noticed. They joked about his obsession. They said he was wasting time on a dead case. They warned him that dwelling on the unsolved would damage his career. And they were right. Hayes missed promotions. He missed other cases because he was too focused on Lucas. His marriage suffered because he came home late, his mind elsewhere, his energy depleted by a mystery he couldn't solve. But Hayes had a theory. He believed, without evidence, that Lucas's disappearance wasn't an accident or a suicide. It was deliberate. It was a choice. Something had happened to make Lucas Anderson choose to disappear, and Hayes couldn't let that go. For 30 years, Hayes carried a worn file folder with him. Lucas Anderson's photograph, yellowed and creased from repeated handling. Interview notes in fading ink. Timelines that had been revised 100 times. Maps with different routes marked and remarked. It became the symbol of his professional obsession. A weight he carried, a case he couldn't close, a mystery that defined him more than it should have. Hayes retired in 2022 at 67 years old. He never solved the case. He never found Lucas. He spent 30 years pursuing a ghost, and the ghost never became real. But Hayes never gave up hope that someday somehow the answer would come. In 2024 it did. 2003. A man matching Lucas's description was spotted in Atlanta, Georgia. He was living alone, working as a maintenance worker, no family. Hayes drove to Atlanta. He interviewed the man. It wasn't Lucas. The disappointment was crushing. 2006. A woman called the hotline claiming Lucas had fathered a child and was living in New Mexico. Police followed up. The man in New Mexico had no connection to Lucas. Another dead end. 2009. 2 fishermen discovered remains in the Edisto River. There was hope, real hope, that this would be Lucas. DNA testing was ordered. The remains were from a teenager who disappeared in 1985. Not Lucas. 2011. A prisoner in a Florida jail claimed he'd seen Lucas years ago, that Lucas was alive and living under an assumed name. Investigators drove to Florida, interviewed the prisoner. The prisoner had been lying, he wanted attention. Nothing came of it. 2014. A body was found in a collapsed mine shaft 40 miles from Charleston. Experts said the remains could be 20 to 30 years old. The nation's news networks reported the story. It might be Lucas. Families gathered. Hope flared. DNA testing proved it was a missing teenager from 1985. Not Lucas. Again. 2018. A woman called claiming Lucas had contacted her, that he was alive, that he wanted to reconcile with his family but was afraid. Investigators traced the call. The woman was mentally ill, suffering from delusions. She'd never met Lucas. Each false lead was a fresh wound. Each disappointment was a renewal of the original trauma. Sandra had learned to move forward, to remarry, to build a new life. But each false lead brought her back to 1997. Each DNA test that wasn't Lucas was a small death. Michelle, now a licensed therapist specializing in trauma and loss, processed her grief through her work. She understood, on an intellectual level, that unresolved cases create psychological damage. She lived it every day. Hayes watched the calendar march forward. Years became decades. The case aged like wine that never improved, never clarified. It stayed the same, unsolved, unexplained, a monument to the limits of police work. By 2023, the case had been featured on podcasts, in online forums, and amateur true crime databases. It was famous in a small way. A legend. But no closer to resolution. Then, in March 2024, something changed. Grief without closure is a different beast than grief with an ending. When someone dies, the mind accepts it. The body is gone. There's a funeral. There's an acknowledgement. The grief is terrible, but it has a shape. It has an end point. You grieve for a time and then, eventually, you move forward. But when someone disappears without explanation, the mind cannot accept it. The person might be dead. They might be alive. They might be suffering. They might be choosing not to return. The uncertainty creates a permanent wound that never fully heals. Sandra experienced this for 30 years. She married again in 2004. Her second husband was kind, patient, and understood that she was grieving someone who might not be dead. But there was always a phantom presence in their marriage, the question of Lucas, the wondering, the what if. Sandra became a woman who lived in two timelines simultaneously. One where she'd moved forward and one where she was still waiting for Lucas to come home. Michelle, Lucas's youngest child, became a therapist specifically because of her father's disappearance. She spent her career helping other people process trauma and loss, but she couldn't fully process her own. She had fragments of a father, memories from age 19 frozen in time. She never got to know him as an adult. Never got to tell him about her education, her career, her relationships. The father she knew was a phantom, a memory, someone who existed only in photographs and conversation. Lucas's two sons rarely spoke about him. They'd already had limited contact before his disappearance. His absence was less a rupture in their lives and more a confirmation of a distance that had always existed. But even they, in their way, carried the weight of an unexplained absence. By the 2010s, the family had accepted that they would never know. The police had moved on. The media had forgotten. Lucas Anderson became a footnote in true crime databases, a cold case that would never be solved. The family learned to live with the void. They learned to survive grief without closure. But survival isn't healing. It's just continuing. Detective Hayes, in his retirement, kept the file on his desk at home. He couldn't let it go. And neither could the mystery. Because mysteries, once they exist, don't disappear on their own. They wait. In 2023, the Charleston Police Department entered Lucas Anderson's DNA into genealogical databases used by law enforcement. This technology didn't exist in 1997. It didn't exist in 2007. It barely existed in 2017. But by 2023, genealogical DNA matching had become a standard investigative tool. DNA from Lucas's old hairbrush, preserved in evidence, was extracted and entered into the system. The police released the database. And waited. In March 2024, exactly 27 years after Lucas disappeared, the database returned a match. A person living in Jacksonville, Florida, had submitted DNA for ancestry purposes. The match was statistically impossible to be coincidental. The person in Jacksonville shared DNA with Lucas Anderson. According to the analysis, they were the same person. Or extremely close relatives. The probability was 99.97%. The police immediately contacted the person living in Jacksonville. The person's name was Martin Cole. He was 77 years old. He lived alone in a small apartment. He'd lived in Jacksonville since 1998. Martin Cole claimed not to know who Lucas Anderson was. He said the DNA match must be an error. He was cooperative but confused. But then investigators started digging. They discovered something shocking. Martin Cole had no official documentation before 1998. No driver's license from before that date. No tax records. No social security records from his working years. He'd existed as a person but invisibly. He paid bills in cash. He worked jobs that didn't require documentation. He lived in a way designed to avoid leaving a trail. Investigators pulled records from Jacksonville dating back to 1997. They found newspaper archives from late March 1997. A bank robbery. A security guard shot and killed. The crime went unsolved. No suspects were ever arrested. Then they found parking lot surveillance footage from that day. Grainy, faded, barely visible. But present. A truck matching the description of Lucas's 1992 Ford pickup was parked near the bank in the hours before the robbery. Martin Cole, according to his apartment lease and other records, had been in Jacksonville in March 1997. The timeline matched. The location matched. Everything matched. Detective Raymond Hayes, pulled out of retirement for this investigation, made the connection immediately. Lucas Anderson hadn't disappeared. He'd gone into hiding. He'd witnessed a crime. A murder. And something, or someone, had forced him to choose, disappear and live or stay and die. Hayes sat in the interrogation room across from Martin Cole, an 77-year-old man who'd been living the last 27 years as someone else. And for the first time in 3 decades, Hayes knew the answer was finally coming. On March 27, 1997, a bank in Jacksonville, Florida, was robbed. The robbery itself was unremarkable, not particularly violent, not particularly organized. 2 men entered Consolidated Bank at 4:47 p.m. One had a gun. The security guard, a man named Raymond Foster, 52 years old, confronted them. He was shot. He died 20 minutes later in the parking lot. The robbers escaped with $47,000. The crime was never solved. No suspects were arrested. The case went cold. For Jacksonville law enforcement, it was another unsolved robbery, another dead witness, another case that would be filed away and forgotten. But police investigation in 2024 uncovered something that had been missed in 1997. Lucas Anderson had been in Jacksonville. What? He'd been meeting with his half-brother, James Anderson. James Anderson was Lucas's biological half-brother from their father's first marriage. The two had been estranged for decades. They hadn't seen each other since childhood. But in late March 1997, James had contacted Lucas. He wanted to meet. He had something to discuss. Lucas, obliging and perhaps curious, had driven to Jacksonville to see him. What Lucas didn't know was that James Anderson was involved with organized crime figures operating in Florida. On the afternoon of March 27, 1997, Lucas arrived at a parking lot near the bank to meet with James. He was waiting in his truck when he saw it happen. He saw the robbery unfold. He saw the security guard shot. He watched a man die from a distance, helpless and terrified. Then James approached Lucas's truck. What happened next was never explicitly documented, but investigators pieced it together from circumstantial evidence and the pattern of Lucas's subsequent behavior. James made Lucas an offer, or perhaps a threat. Disappear. Leave South Carolina. Change your identity. Never contact your family. Never speak about what you saw. If you do, if you ever come forward, if you ever talk, the organization will find you. And they'll find your family. Lucas had no federal witness protection. Law enforcement had offered him nothing. The police didn't know he'd witnessed anything. He had no legal protection, no official hiding place, no institutional support. He had only a choice, his identity or his life. Lucas chose his life. He left Jacksonville in his truck. He drove south. He abandoned the truck and took a bus. He purchased fake identification. He became Martin Cole. He moved to Jacksonville, paradoxically to the same city where he'd witnessed the murder, but with a different identity in a different part of town. For 30 years he lived as someone else. When Detective Hayes interviewed Martin Cole in May 2024, the 77-year-old man sat across the table in Jacksonville Police Department and confirmed everything. His real name was Lucas Anderson. He'd been living as Martin Cole since 1998. He'd witnessed the bank robbery and the murder of Raymond Foster in 1997. He'd been coerced into disappearing by people connected to organized crime. His voice on the recorded interview was quiet, almost relieved. "I've been living a lie for 30 years, he said. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of being someone else." He explained his reasoning. He was afraid. The organization that had threatened him was real and dangerous. He believed they would follow through on their threats. He believed his family would be in danger if he tried to contact them. So he stayed silent. He became invisible. He lived in Jacksonville, working small jobs, paying bills in cash, avoiding any documentation that would create a trail. I wanted to call my wife, he said. Every single day for 30 years I wanted to call her. But I thought it would endanger her. I thought if I reached out they'd find me. And if they found me they'd find her. He watched his children grow up from a distance. He saw newspaper articles about the search for him. He knew his family was suffering. But he convinced himself that his silence was protection. It was the only choice I could make, he said. When investigators asked him about his half-brother James, Lucas broke down. I didn't know he was involved in that crime. I didn't know he was part of it. And when I realized what he'd done, I knew I couldn't go to the police. Because if I went to the police I'd have to explain what I was doing there. I'd have to explain my family connection. And then everything would unravel. James Anderson, now 75 years old, was arrested in May 2024. He was charged with murder in connection with the bank robbery and the death of Raymond Foster. A second suspect was identified and arrested. Detective Hayes, listening to Lucas's confession, felt 30 years of obsession finally satisfied. But satisfaction isn't the same as closure. For the family, the true reckoning was just beginning. In July 2024, Michelle drove to Jacksonville to meet her father. She was 56 years old. The last time she'd seen Lucas she was 19. She'd spent 37 years without him. She'd become a therapist, specializing in trauma and loss. She'd built a life, a career, a sense of identity. But a part of her had remained frozen at 19, waiting for her father to come home. She didn't know what to expect. She didn't know if she would cry or rage or simply feel nothing. She'd spent decades imagining this moment, and no amount of imagination prepares you for reality. They met in a coffee shop in Jacksonville. A neutral location recommended by a mediator. Lucas walked in, an old man smaller than she remembered, worn by decades of hiding. They looked at each other. Michelle said, "You're old." Lucas said, "You're a woman." They both cried. They held each other. And then, slowly they began to talk. The conversation was complicated. Michelle wanted answers. She wanted to understand why he'd left. Why he hadn't reached out. Why he'd let them suffer. Lucas tried to explain his fear, his reasoning, his desperation. But explanations can't undo 30 years. "I'm angry," Michelle said. "I'm angry because you weren't there. I'm angry because you made a choice that affected all of us. I'm angry that you didn't trust us with the truth." "I was trying to protect you," Lucas said. "You weren't protecting us," Michelle said. "You were protecting yourself. You made that choice. And we paid the price." She wasn't wrong. Over the following weeks, Lucas met his other children. His sons were distant, their relationship already tenuous before his disappearance. Sandra, Lucas's ex-wife, chose not to meet him. She'd moved on. She'd remarried. A reunion wouldn't heal 30 years of grief, it would only reopen wounds. Detective Hayes attended Lucas's testimony before a federal grand jury in August 2024. James Anderson and his accomplice were convicted. James received life in prison. The accomplice received 35 years. Justice of a sort was served. But justice that comes 30 years late is not the same as justice that comes when it can prevent suffering. It's justice as epilogue, not justice as prevention. The case of Lucas Anderson was closed. But the work of healing had only begun. The Lucas Anderson case is solved. The mystery is explained. The man who disappeared is found. The crime is punished. But the case raises questions that have no answer. The first question: where was the system that failed Lucas Anderson? In 1997, when Lucas was afraid, when he was threatened, when he was forced to choose between his identity and his survival, where was federal witness protection? Where were the law enforcement agencies that should have offered him safety? Why wasn't he told he had legal options? Why wasn't he offered institutional protection? The answer is that the system failed him. He fell through a gap. A gap where witnesses don't report crimes because they're too afraid. A gap where people disappear not because they're dead, but because we offer them no other choice. The second question: is justice that comes 30 years late actually justice? James Anderson was convicted in 2024 for a murder that occurred in 1997. He was 47 years old when he committed the crime. He's now 75. He'll spend his final years in prison. The victim, Raymond Foster, has been dead for 27 years. His family had already grieved him, already moved forward, already accepted that his murder would never be solved. Does a conviction decades later actually serve justice? Or does it only serve the illusion of justice? The third question: what was the cost of Lucas's silence? He lost 30 years of his life. He lost his family. He lost his identity. Sandra spent 30 years wondering and eventually moving forward without him. Michelle spent 37 years without her father. His sons barely knew him before he disappeared, and they still barely know him now. The organization that threatened him may or may not have actually harmed anyone. Lucas was afraid of a hypothetical threat. And that fear cost him everything. These questions don't have answers. They're the echoes that remain after a case is solved but never truly resolved. The Lucas Anderson case teaches us something dark about the American justice system. It teaches us that people are sometimes forced to choose between their identity and their survival. It teaches us that institutions fail people. It teaches us that justice delayed is a different kind of injustice. Lucas Anderson is alive. He's been found. He's telling his truth. But 30 years of silence can't be undone. And that's the real mystery, not what happened to Lucas but why we let it happen in the first place.